welcome everyone. Thank you for coming at this presentation. And Raluca, Ovidiu, please come join us. So we slowly move towards the beginning of this session. We are here to present the last book that's been published by Institute of Radical Imagination together with l'Internazionale Confederation, and the book is the FOR RADICAL ECOLOGIES Manifesto, and officially published by Bruno, who's a Venetian publisher. And I thank you, the nourished parterre of guests that have been invited to contribute to this publication. The reason why we are here is really based in this path that started almost 2 years ago, after the conflict in Ukraine and the energy crisis that was consequent to that. As Institute, we felt the need to think on how to position us as art workers and the art world towards what was a climate justice crisis and a social justice crisis, and taking into account the new situation. And in this year and a half, many things have happened, and our last meeting around the co-writing of the manifesto was precisely after October the 7th. So the publication and the manifesto inherits also this temporality and those events. I will leave then to Emanuele and Marco and Federica to go deeper into the path and the methodology that brought us to the manifesto. But fundamentally, the manifesto is a process of precisely co-writing in an attempt to position the art world in the struggles, to focus on who are the subjects of those struggles, and then also to concentrate on a call to action. So how our practices can really contribute to those struggles. And these are the three parts of the manifesto, and these are a little bit the parts that will follow this panel and the presentation of the publication. We will start with contributions by Emanuele Braga and Marco Baravalle afterwards, who are basing the fundamentals, the theoretical foundations of the manifesto in new materialisms, and Federica, who's also a member of the Institute of Radical Imagination, as well as Emanuele and Marco, is speaking about this anti-species perspective that is one of the pillars of the FOR RADICAL ECOLOGIES Manifesto. And after them, we will have a second part where we will discuss more around institutions and the future of museums in this world of radical ecologies, with a conversation of Françoise Vergès in conversation with Maddalena, Fragnito, And we will begin first with, I'm sorry, I apologize, with Ashley Dawson, who's connected from New York online. And then we will move on to Françoise Vergès, and a second part with Manolo Borja-Villel in conversation with Marco Baravalle. And after this part, we will expand to the practices with Raluca, Voinea, Ovidiu, Tichindeleanu, and Francesco Martone and Rosa Chicon online, Andrea and Oliver Ressler. So I will just pass the word to Emanuele.
Thank you very much, Gabriella. Yeah, I mean, just to open the discussion, maybe I could say that the main attempt of all this trajectory has been to take the cultural discourse and the art production, so with really the agents and the actors as artists or intellectuals in the territory of eco-activism. So we physically organized the assembly discussion with the activist in the space and time of activism and struggles. This means being together in climate camps, you know, when everyone is discussing what to do, the actions, doing demonstration together, opening construction building, and doing really the actions. And so this has been the territory, the space and time in which we gather in order to co-write how to position the art field in the territory of radical ecology. Few words on my take also in the book. Being an artist and operating also in the galleries, museums, and so on, it's self-evident that the cultural impact of an approach in which the human colonizing the nature has been really criticized, and we are full of aesthetics in which this interdependency in between human and other than human are shown. But on the other side, this, let's say, cluster of new materialism cultural impact is not the same language of eco-activism, okay? Sometimes there are also frictions in between them, because the background of eco-activism is more anarchism, eco-Marxism, or eco-socialism, or perspectives that are coming mainly from the South, that are speaking a totally other cosmology. So the attempt in my text was how to combine this, or to look for a dialogue in between this critique to Anthropocene and the exceptionalism of human in nature, and on the other side, the struggle really to be, not to avoid the relation of powers that sometimes is lacking in the first discourse. And I use some tools from autonomia and operaism movements in Italy, because, for example, concept as co-research to produce knowledge within the struggles, concept like social strike, and concept like the constituent process for resistance, especially referring to Tony Negri production, for me, could be a way to link these two trajectories, because in a way we can start to understand that this wandering, this generative process beyond human, can be rooted in the oppressed subjectivity producing resistance, no? And in this, through this process, build up new social fabrics, new generative process, and probably we can constitute, we can generate a different way to stay in this planet and to face the climate breakdown, being rooted in the struggles, but also with a perspective that is beyond the colonial approach of human in nature. That's all.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. I'll try to stay on the track that you just opened and to be quick. As you can see from the number of speakers here, this presentation will last 24 hours. It's basically not a presentation but a marathon, which is another format that is very, very popular. No, I'm joking, of course. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, yes. One of so the urgency of the book, and also the way it was put together, the idea that the book was put together not simply a few scholars and artists around the table saying, oh, who are the most interesting scholars that we can invite to write and to intervene in our book. No, it was really like a process of 2 years where we went to climate camps, we went to climate forums, we stayed within the movement, we created assemblies, we discussed and we co-wrote this manifesto. So the urgency was really how to think about our positioning as art workers within the struggle for climate justice. As Emanuele just said, one of the things that we thought were crucial was in this era of the fall of binarism, that you cannot go to visit any exhibition without people telling you that binarisms are bad. There is one binarism that is still very hard to address. That is the one that we think is crucial when it comes to radical ecology, between historical materialism and new materialisms, with S in the plural. So usually these are kind of weighed one against the other, and I think that, and we think, at least some of the people behind the manifesto think that in order for our workers to be more effective and to sort of correctly address the problem of climate justice and radical ecology, this binarism, this is another binarism that needs to fall. We all know that with traditional historical materialism, the limit is that usually we do not accept the agency of matter, with the risk of being Promethean, of being too much, let's say, productivist, let's say, and also with the limits of structuring a still very anthropocentric point of view. So acknowledging the agency of matter becomes important, especially in a field like art, which works with language, which works with symbols, which work with imagination, which work with utopias, and so on and so forth. And of course, this opens a whole new area for narration to be experimented, and by artists, by scholars, by curators, by whoever works with science, symbols, and language. Not only, of course, but this is what we do for work. So why not accepting this challenge of imagine what does it mean to live a less anthropocentric life, to be with a matter that is vital. On the other hand, like most of the time, new materialisms, also with some reasons when it comes, especially new material, especially feminists who are also new materialists have lots of reason to criticize Marxism. But the danger is that sometimes when you underline the agency of matter, you forget about the materiality of power relationships. So that means that you run the risk of aestheticizing a new possible radical life condition that is more ecological. That we are so much focused on the, I don't know, on how trees speak. I'm trivializing, of course, I'm banalizing, but we don't see, you know, the role of capitalism in cutting the trees around the world. We don't see the violence of extraction, of extractivism. And in my short essay, I do have a sort of polemical target, which is a very popular philosopher, Timothy Morton, one of the representatives of object-oriented ontology, and his little book, All Art is Ecological, which in my opinion says very interesting things, but very dangerous things. So what he says is that, look guys, art is an ecological experience per se. Why? Because when we are related to a painting, for example, and we leave ourselves, we allow the painting to seduce ourselves, then we kind of experience the agency of a non-human object, or the agency of matter. So art is something that puts humans being in a different relationship with non-human beings, of course with important ecological consequences. The problem is that Timothy Morton says that in order to be able to really experience a painting acting on us, we do have to forget everything that concerns the context and everything that concerns the social relationship of powers that insist on that work. And this is very, very dangerous, because we are confronted with a theory that sounds very new, and in the end it goes back to a very idealist notion of aesthetics, where art again needs to be experienced without, you know, in a leaving reality aside, leaving reality outside. And I think that also the examples that he brings are kind of revelatory of something. So for example, he speaks about how, for example, Bjork was able to contemplate for hours the Rothko Chapel in Houston, while scholars usually only spend 20 minutes there and then go away. Yeah, I'm getting to an end. And I was immediately thinking,
24 hours though.
And okay, I'm thinking, I have nothing against Bjork, I love Bjork, but she's a retired pop star. I'm thinking, I'm putting myself in the shoes of the scholar who is there in Houston for one of the seminars. He doesn't have a fee, you know, he probably needs to run two conferences and so on and so forth. And then, yeah, of course, probably Bjork has a beautiful sensitivity, but there are also very important social conditions that structure our experience of art. And what Morton pushes us to do is to totally forgive about them. While I think this is not something against the autonomy of the artwork, but I think that in order to better experience the autonomy of the artwork, even when it teaches us about a new possible radical ecological relationship with the world, is also to gain the autonomy of the artwork, for example, from neoliberal capture. So understanding, for example, how today decolonial, Anthropocene, and other terms are becoming buzzwords, and what the neoliberal art system does is basically, again, diffusing them and turning them into cultural commodities. So, and I close, I think many contributions of the book are thinking about how accepting the agencies of the agency of matter, accepting the challenge, the epistemological, aesthetic, and political challenges that this poses, and at the same time doing it while considering the materiality of the relations of powers that go through, that interest, that affect the artwork. So thank you, and Federica, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So in the manifesto and thus in the book, we also interrogated who is speaking and to whom we are speaking, or with whom we are speaking, better said, and recognizing another link, which is, of course, given that we approach what we are talking about from a double perspective, which is new materialist, but also historically materialist. At the same time, we also understood that we cannot only talk about human beings when we talk about ecology, especially in a political perspective. And so acknowledging this width of life is not for us another turn, like an animal turn, or a turning animal, or turning to animals, but rather acknowledging that we are part of something which goes beyond humanity, but at the same time interrogating the human that has always been at the center of any kind of discourse about culture, about art, but also about nature. So what we are doing with this book, starting with the manifesto, is trying to resituating ourselves, first of all, inside this natural cultural continuum, and talking about ecology, not necessarily or about animals, not necessarily about non-human beings, because when we talk about nature, we have to talk about ourselves and our position inside this continuum, which is something which very often goes unnoticed or invisibilized. We are trying to deconstructing, first of all, the privileged position of the unmarked subject, and trying to also fight this idea of free-floating in this kind of broth of multiple relations that sometimes is the discourse that we very often read when we read new materialisms, even feminist new materialists, like, for example, Bennett, that equates a plastic bottle with the body of a dead animal, without, as exactly Timothy Moulton does, retracing the process that led to that death or to that end of the object, and even treating a dead body as an object. And we have a problem here. So what we are trying to do, resituating ourselves, is trying also to reflect on the way we anthropomorphize other beings, but at the same time trying to readopt what feminisms also taught us, being partial, being positioned, being situated. And being partial, recognizing, acknowledging our partiality, means acknowledging that we are in connection with other lives, but these kind of connections are never symmetrical, never the same, and also include power relations, include hierarchies that also foreground the assumption that is very hard to die, which is the speciesist one. We've dealt with racism, we've dealt with sexism, we've dealt with other kind of ideologies, but we always assume that we have an identity which is human and which is unmarked. So we're trying to foreground the natural cultural continuum. We're trying to say, when we talk about nature, we also talk about human beings, and when we talk about total liberation, we are talking about a liberation involving all lives, human and non-human lives, because we are part of the environment, and the environment is not nature at all. It's just something in which we are in, both nature and culture. So society is never human society only, and nature is not only what we look from a distance, but we are immersed in it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Federica. Now I would pass the word to Ashley Dawson, who's connecting with us from New York and in a different, of course, time schedule. So thank you, Ashley, for making the effort to be with us. Ashley's been part of the discussions around the manifesto even from before the idea of writing it, because he was part of a platform, Art for Radical Ecologies, that we launched 2 years ago, and he's been nourishing the conversation. Just to say that also the contributors to the book have participated in the first person to the writing of the manifesto. And he's a professor and author committed with environmentalism, and he's published a lot. And we asked him to intervene in relation to one article of the manifesto that says that no oil is a priority. Just oil is a priority for radical ecologists. So he contributed with fossil abolition and culture strike. Thank you, Ashley. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate and for all of your work in putting together this forum. And greetings to you all from the belly of the imperial beast. So I'm going to share my screen quickly and then start my PowerPoint. So, as you heard, I contributed something on culture strike and fossil abolition to the collection. And I wanted to start out by just giving us a kind of snapshot of how these networks of fossil fuels work and the ways that they link cultural institutions.
Wait a second, Ashley. We sort of lost your presentation. We cannot show it on the screen. My apologies for that. Just allow us 1 second.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. I stopped screen sharing. Let me know.
Yes. And and also the question we asked to Ashley for today was also to articulate why, and if this is also of course part of his contribution in the book, why museums become this territory of really fight, for radical ecologies, and then we have our cultural institutions becoming subjects of greenwash. Okay. The screen is sharing again. Culture strike and fossil abolition.
Working?
Ashley, yes, yes. So please, sorry.
Okay, great. No problem. So I wanted to start out by just giving you a bit of one specific example of the networks that link cultural institutions like museums to academia and then to fossil capital. So if one looks at one specific individual, Mariette Westerman, she was New York University's vice chancellor in Abu Dhabi, right? NYU has a branch in Abu Dhabi. And in addition, she was also on the board of the US United Arab Emirates Business Council, which focused on the UAE oil company, ADNOC. And then as of June this year, she has accepted the directorship of the Guggenheim. So I think in one person, Mariette Westerman, we really see these networks, these elite networks that link academia, in this case NYU, with cultural institutions like the Guggenheim, and then fossil capitalism, in this case ADNOC. And if you look at that picture on the right, you can see Westerman, and who is she sitting next to? Sultan Al-Jaber, who, as you all will, I'm sure, recall, was the president of the last UN Climate Summit. Nations agreed to the loosest possible plan to begin to transition away from coal, oil, and gas. It was a non-binding plan, but at the same time, and shortly thereafter, Al-Jaber announced that ADNOC was going to expand extractivism. So the idea that, by putting an oil executive in charge of the UN Climate Summit, we're going to really get these institutions to see the light and transform their behavior is patently untrue. So what's going on here? And why are these fossil capitalist billionaires focused so much on cultural institutions? Well, one important fact is the corruption of our governments and of international institutions that have unfolded over the last 50 to 70 years as a result of the conservative counter-revolution. So you have folks like Abigail Disney, the focus of this op-ed, essentially begging politicians to tax her because the taxes are so lax on these billionaires, and of course they can take much of the massive amounts of money they're making from their exploits and put them towards tax write-offs and philanthropic donations. And in doing that, they can help to support their narcissistic self-presentation in elite circles. But there's something else that's going on as well, and that, of course, is greenwashing. What exactly do I mean when I talk about greenwashing? Well, I'm thinking about the ways in which philanthropic donations to cultural institutions are a really important way in which fossil capitalism seeks to win and to maintain a social license for extractive operations. So greenwashing is a really important way to generate ideological legitimacy for fossil capitalism. It has to be seen as related, therefore, to broader efforts by fossil capitalists to maintain their power, work that includes extensive spending on lobbying politicians, large campaign donations to political parties, in other words, buying votes, and also the sponsoring of legislation to illegalize and repress protests against fossil infrastructure. Here in the US, it's illegal in 30 states to do any kind of protest, including nonviolent protests, anywhere near any kinds of pipelines. So greenwashing through cultural institutions needs to be seen as part of this kind of spectrum or continuum of efforts by fossil capitalism. And artists have reacted to that. In fact, they've kind of been on the front lines of contesting these forms of greenwashing. Here in this slide, you see a protest by Liberate Tate from 2010, one of the first organizations in Britain and North America to really challenge big museums' complicity with BP and other fossil fuel corporations. And that kind of work has continued to the present. So this is an image from protests held late last year against the British Museum's $63 million partnership with British Petroleum. So it's not as if these protests have actually led to the abolition of fossil capitalist networks that are finding their way into cultural institutions. We need to keep up the pressure. And we also need to keep showing how the efforts of fossil capitalism to rebrand itself are really fake, right? So I'm sure many of you will remember how BP early in the 2000s rebranded itself from British Petroleum to Beyond Petroleum, and created that kind of vaguely solar-looking logo. And then I'm sure many of you will remember that after only a couple of years, BP decided that they weren't going to make enough money by backing renewables. And so they shut down and spun off their renewable portfolio. And even recently, their promises during the pandemic to shift away from fossil fuels, they've essentially backed off from those protests and are back to drilling for oil and gas as much as possible. So it's pretty clear that BP and similar fossil capitalist corporations are bad actors. But what about other folks? What about entities that are not as explicitly connected to fossil capital? For instance, just last month at the London Science Museum, activists protested against the sponsorship of the museum by Adani. Now, Adani is a massive India-based coal corporation that also owns mines in Australia and many other parts of the world. But the branch of the company that was sponsoring the London Science Museum is called Adani Green. It's run by Sagar Adani, who's the nephew of the Adani Group's co-founder. And you can see a quotation here from Sagar Adani, who's talking about how Adani Green is making the transition happen on a very large scale. He says that criticism is always welcome, but our focus is on solving problems, right? So this kind of idea that Adani has created a new green branch, which is actually going to push the energy transition forward quickly. And then that outlook is reiterated by the CEO of the Science Museum Group in Blatchford, who talks about how the sponsorship by Adani Green is going to help engage audiences with the science of climate change and help get them connected to Adani Green's really important efforts to make energy transition happen in India, which has a massive population. Well, it's definitely true that it's important to think about renewable energy transition and just energy transition in global South countries like India. But we also need to think about the fact that Adani Green is part of and remains part of the Adani Coal Corporation, which is engaged in a massive expansion of coal extraction at the moment in India, including on the land of the Adivasis, the indigenous people in India, that is having really, really problematic human rights impacts, including assassinations and arbitrary arrests of protesters. And you can really see the gender component of that here in this image. So women protesting are being accused of terrorism and put in jail pretty much indefinitely. So it doesn't make any sense to give the Adani Corporation or its green offshoot a free pass and let it engage in greenwashing in these kinds of institutions. And all this brings us to a set of theoretical questions about the key characteristics of fossil capital. For Andrea's mom, fossil capital creates abstract space and time. It seeks to maximize its control over labor. It allows for a higher degree of capital accumulation, which of course also is connected to creating CO2 pollution and natural destruction as a necessary byproduct. And lastly, as a result of all those previous factors, it creates massive global inequalities by extracting resources from one place for the benefit of another's economy. And all of those characteristics have led critics like Tatiana Soding in this really important essay about why we should resist the remaking of fossil capital into green capital to argue that fossil capital's basic logic means that it will not unhinge the fossil capitalist mode of production. The restructuring of fossil capital, she argues, will not succeed in halting the climate crisis, nor in ending its rampage against ecosystems and livelihoods. The one caveat or exception that I would make to that are efforts by global South nations where there are publicly controlled energy companies, such as the Colombian mining company, to engage in a swift and just transition away from extractivism of fossil fuels. So I think we can kind of find some hope there, and we should be engaging with these efforts and backing them. But private for-profit companies like Adani or BP, I think we need to argue should not be engaged with our cultural institutions and should not be engaging with the kind of greenwashing that those cultural institutions help facilitate. So what are the key demands for culture strike? Well, as laid out in the Institute for Radical Imagination book, fossil abolition has to be a priority. Any complicity with biocapitalism, extractive industry, and financial greenwashing in and outside art institutions must end. And that doesn't just mean fossil capitalist corporations, but it also means big banks, hedge funds, private equity firms that are bankrolling fossil capitalism. And so how do we make sure that that happens? Well, we need to borrow from our comrades in Palestine who have elaborated a very thoughtful model for boycott and divest from cultural institutions. We shouldn't visit museums that are connected to fossil capitalism. We should engage in professional collaborations with those institutions, and we should argue for people to end their memberships in those museums. But we also need to, as engaged researchers and artists and activists, keep digging up and publicizing information about these institutions, collaboration with planet destroyers, because as I hope my presentation has really shown, this is really a moving situation, right? These institutions don't stay still, and neither does fossil capitalism. So we need to keep doing research and revealing what they're doing. And last of all, of course, there's a really important role for direct action, including occupying museums, using protests inside and outside to highlight the key question: what is the role of these public institutions during an age of climate emergency? And then in addition, we should keep building alternative fossil-free institutions that can become sites of liberation and really meaningful alternatives to the current death-dealing status quo. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all very much for listening, and I'm sorry if I went over a little bit.
And our museums. And actually, this meeting here today, this presentation linked to the book, is happening into a journey of 4 years that Institute of Radical Imagination, together with 17 other members, institutions, is doing. And it's called the Museum of the Commons. And we are really trying to rethink how our museums and cultural institutions can be reshaped, probably, if possible. And so it was for us important, and it's a pleasure and an honor to also have had Françoise Vergès dialoguing with the proposal of the manifesto. Françoise Vergès is has among her last publication published a program of absolute disorder, decolonizing the museum, and in a conversation with Marco Baravalle and Maddalena Fragnito, has contributed with an article that is One Day Freedom Will Be. And this one contribution is one of a series of essays that are content in this publication that will also be published in open source on the platform of l'Internazionale online, which is also our idea of practicing also the commons and commoning knowledge. So the floor is yours. I think you have the microphone there. No, it's there. Thank you. Sure. So, hello everybody. As many have said before, the publication of this book was a long, collective and multidimensional process in which, since the beginning, we decided to open a discussion with Françoise Vergès in order to, let's say, talk about the difficulties, or better said, the impossibility to decolonize art and cultural Western institution if we conceive decolonizing not as a metaphor. Therefore, starting from her last book, the question was how to think through a radical horizon in which to decolonize institution, not using this as a buzzword, but rather as a practice involving structural changes, such as labor changes, architectural changes, our relation with toxic philanthropy, our relation with energy, and things that also changes in the institutional politics of visibility and invisibility. So that was the plan. Then, when the time for our discussion arrived, we were, as we are still now, witnessing a genocide unfolding before our eyes. And I remember that morning setting up the Zoom call after a sleepless night. We were in those days of the Al-Shifa hospital massacre, struggling to, I don't know, on how to open the discussion for two main reasons. One, because I was tired and not so keen to, pretend to be clever, having the right question in the right moment. And second, because I couldn't think anything else than Palestine. As soon as I opened the Zoom call with Françoise, I just discovered that in front of me there was a person, Françoise Vergès, who was experiencing the same emotion. So she was tired, she was in fire, and she was in rage. And I suddenly also discovered that that was the topic, that Palestine was the main topic. What else better than the Palestine cause could explain the complicity between the foundation of democratic art and cultural Western institution and genocidal processes and colonial and settler colonial processes. So, if you don't mind, I would start from addressing this, let's say, structural relation, which is basically the main topic of the article we published together. Thank you.
Good evening. Yes, I mean, perhaps when we talk about art, we should start by saying that in Gaza, all the museums, all the libraries, the archive, the historical site, the archaeological site, the mosques, the church have been destroyed or in ruin. And that is absolutely, this is colonization. Colonization is also, of course, killing, genocide, massacre, and it's also renaming, giving new names, and destroying everything that could be, the other memory, and appropriation. Appropriation of culture. So for instance, Palestinian cuisine is becoming Israeli cuisine everywhere. So this is, and the museum plays that role in the West, has offered to the West an image of the world that so the people in the West feel totally entitled to own that world. It's totally natural and banal to go to museum and see objects coming from all over the world. And this was, if that's okay. That's okay that you have dozens of objects from Africa, Asia, the Oceania, the Americas, everywhere in any museum of Europe. And as you do know, you will not find in any museum of the global south, folkloric costume from Bavaria, or I don't know, furniture from the Italian Renaissance. So the flow goes one way, always. So this is it's absolutely, so even the culture, the way the question of the museum and the fact that you find there the beauty of the world was based on looting. And looting is inseparable from colonization, which is inseparable from Western modern democracy. There is not one modern democracy which has not been founded on genocide, massacre, and looting and stealing. Whether it's in Europe with getting wealth through slavery and then post-slavery colonization and then imperialism, or countries like United States, Canada, and Australia, which really were founded on their own soil, on genocide, ethnic cleansing, and dispossession. And then say that they were democracy. And this is colonial settler democracy. And Israel being the last example in the 21st century of this connection between democracy and colonial settlement. There is a really deep common, it's not just colonization that happened aside. Colonization and modern Western democracy are together, they go together. So this, the absolute importance of separating these two things is also what is being shown today with Palestine. I mean, political theorist abolitionist H.L.T. Quans called this anti-democracy. And she said that we have not, in fact, seen democracy yet. And that we have to abolish anti-democracy, so she's an abolitionist, and to find a new ethic of, decolonial, anti-racist, anti-colonial democracy. So that structure is very clear with what's happening in Palestine. And it's no surprise that all the West is behind Israel, the state of Israel, and defending, because they are defending themselves. They are defending what is, in fact, their foundation and their lie, the deep, deep lie that is at the root of this Western liberal democracy. And the museum, I mean, if we want to talk about the museum, is absolutely central to that structure, absolutely central. And as I say, even if you don't go to the museum comes to you.
Exactly about this last point you made. So in the article you address something that I find really interesting, which is the difficulty to say that Western institutions are a failure, since somehow they work, they are full of people. So just consider, for instance, now, no? We are here, not within the biennial, but within the biennial temporality. So, so can you tell something more about this fascination, no? About this powerful force of attraction that these institutions have?
Yeah. Well, I think the museum is the last temple of the sacred. In a church now, you go in church, you can even have rock concert or whatever. And anyway, nobody behaves in a church anymore, I mean, except if you have a mass. But in the museum, everyone enters, and it's, you speak like that. Raise your voice. You don't. You will never think of bringing flower to the goddess, that is there, that you see. You will never sit, you will never, I mean, this is a place, the body, when you enter the museum, it's not your own body, it's another body. You suddenly, inhabit another body. The very disciplined body is like yours again, and you look at things, and you don't dare to say that you don't, you're not interested. You must be interested. You must be, you must admire. You are looking at the chef-d'oeuvre, of all humanity, and that you see the West, which has been, protected and preserved all this treasure that all these people don't know, did not know how to preserve. So thank God and the goddess that, the West were there, because, look, as we know, 90% of the African art is outside of African continent, and so in the Western Museum. But so it really offers to, really the place of neutrality. Apparently, the museum should not be going through conflict. If you have a strike, it's like, like bad behavior, like these people, you don't strike, not in a place like that. You can strike at the university and everywhere, but not in the museum. That's, bad behavior. So that, thanks to decolonize this place, now this is changing, or, those who occupy also British Museum, to process BP, but for a long time, the museum protected itself. The museum has succeeded at building itself as a neutral place, a place that should not be, the conflict. If, for instance, a museum will talk about the conflict in Ukraine, it will be not about what led to that, but about, like the denunciation of the crime, of the war, and then we will see Ukrainian artists. But this will not be about, how to dismantle imperialism. Because otherwise, you burn down the museum, and this is not, this should not happen to that. So it's really a place that is totally pacification, a place of pacification. I'm not saying that, what you see is not important, but the way it is, and also the museum. There is this movie by Alain René, Chris Marker, that was Alioune Diop, the Senegalese intellectual who created the Présence africaine, they say, when the statue enters the museum, they are dead. And this is what we call culture. And this is a botanic of death, and this is culture. So this is, you know, and it's true, this is that, because if, as I say, you know, for instance, when you see a statue or, you know, of goddess from the, you know, like so many, it was also this incredible accumulation. This is also the principle of exhaustivity. You cannot have just 2 Shiva, you have to have 1,000 of Shiva. You cannot have like 100 mass, you have to have 100,000 of mass. You cannot have, it's like this accumulation, constant accumulation, which is absolutely, you wonder what went through their mind, and this continue through the art market today. So this is really extremely important. And of course, when you see this, this statue of a goddess, I mean, yesterday she was there and you were bringing your flower and food and you were talking to her, you were presenting your kid, you were asking, and now she's just a piece of stone. She's no longer, she's not. So the museum is also taking everything that had an affective social life, that people loved, and that was done by someone that you never know who did that, and it's transformed into a dead object. So it's really the culture of death in that, and has something to do with, of course, Russian capitalism. But as you were saying also, Maddalena, I want to go back. For me, it's very important to remember that the museum is a total social space. And it's not just for me about what is on the wall, and that we should have equality, as many women as men, and among the men and the women, be sure that we have everyone represented, whatever that means. For me, it's also who clean the place, who cook, who guard, you know, and you know, who are the technician, you know, because to have a museum, a woman has cleaned it in the morning, you know, and otherwise there is no show. There is no, you know, it's not possible, and you know, so, and these are always underpaid people. These are always exploited people. And it's totally naturalized that the cleaning woman is less paid than the curator. So who gave that social value to this work, and why the cleaning has so low social value, but without the cleaning there will be no curating. So this is for me also that structure. It's not just about the question of representation. It's also the way also that beauty must not show class and race and gender.
Okay, so there's the time for
Yeah, go. Sure, totally. Please,
okay,
don't leave us so soon.
I don't know, yeah, we said already many things, so probably I would add, in this context of appropriation, dispossession and exhaustion of certain bodies, as you said, certain lands, can you expand a bit more, what is a program of total disorder?
Well, as some of you may know, it's a sentence from Frantz Fanon, because I thought that decolonial was everywhere. Everyone wanted to decolonize everything, fashion, you know, advertisement, everything. And I say, no, decolonization is a serious thing. People die for it, you know, and people are still dying, and people are sent to jail for it and being tortured. We should not talk like that, you know. Like, it's obscene. It's really obscene. So, and I say, okay, let's say again, what is decolonization? And Fanon say that, so decolonization, which has for objective to change the world, has to be a program of absolute disorder. It cannot be just polite, you know, like we meet each other around the table and we're just, you know, having a polite discussion. There will be struggle. There will be risk. There will be. It's not going to be, you know, nice. It's not going to be nice, and we see it right now in Gaza. We see it. It's not going to be that the settler will kill to the end. We saw it, you know, what they were ready to do in Algeria. We saw it. They were ready to destroy the country rather than to give in, that to surrender. This was their country. They will never accept that this country was not there, and they were ready for total war. So this is, you know, there is no peace. The peace is impossible with colonial settlement. There is never peace. So even when there will be ceasefire, it will not be peace. Peace will be another struggle. We will have to fight for real peace, true peace. Not this little moment between two wars, you know, until the next one. So this, for me, I mean, at the same time, the question of, there is a lot of question today, and you know, the intervention before was about also what do we need to preserve in a moment of constant destruction and very fast destruction, very fast erasure. So there is a lot of community, when you talk, they want to preserve something, they say it's too fast, and they talk about the museum and say we want to have museums. But they are not talking about the museum that we see. They are talking about effectively what will be the practice of preserving and conserving that is not toxic conservation. Because conservation, as you do know, as you know, the practice itself, the science, it's very toxic, right? So even when, for instance, the West talk about sending back object, you know, returning, in fact, restituting, they are sending toxic objects that are toxic, that cannot not really return in the community. They are full of, you know, like things against pest, you know, the pest and everything. I mean, the two to consider. So, but I have forgotten your question. And
I already answered.
And but so the point from what I suggest is to think. I say the post-museum because, you know, I cannot, I'm not very good at inventing a word, but this question of what we want to preserve and what would be the practice of conservation that will not be toxic, and also that is not also connected with this patriarchal idea that we have to keep everything from, you know, like generation to generation. And you don't know what to put them anymore. You know, the house is full. You can throw away the thing of the grandfather. It does not matter. You will live without it. And then you will invent and create other things. You cannot just, you know, that we cannot live, there are too many objects. So there is also in this idea of conservation, this idea of private property, patriarchy, and you know, like, and it's like totally like immobile that, and it's that Stephen Marx says, you know, the dead waking on you, and you cannot open. There is no more creation. Make some space for people, you know, make some space so we can breathe.
Thank you, Françoise. And this morning, the Museum of the Commons gathered in a climate assembly, debating precisely also the problem of what's the use of conserving artworks in a dying world. So that was exactly at the center of the discussion. So passing the word to and giving welcome to, sorry, my clock is coming, it's ticking. Compliment to the parterre for taking the times, thank you. The word to Manuel Borja-Villel, a complice of the Institute of Radical Imagination, who's been leaving the museum as institution as director of MACBA in Barcelona, as director of Reina Sofia, and now director of the development program of the Catalan museum system. And and so, what other observer could we ask a word about a position towards the museum and what's the future of this institution. And in conversation with Marco Baravalle, contributed with the Museum to Come, will take side for life, that is, for that which mutates incessantly, and it's its contribution to the publication. So.
Thank you, Gabriella, and thank you, Manolo. So, I will immediately ask you a probably difficult question for a museum man like you are. So, Françoise mentioned abolition, and the grammar of abolition has addressed museums recently. The grammar of abolition is at least as old as the struggle of African and African-American slaves in the 19th century against chattel slavery in the US. Then was updated from the times of the Black Panthers onwards to the abolition of the industrial prison system. And more recently, for example, a group like Decolonize Displays has addressed the MoMA, calling for the abolition of MoMA, which really marks a shift in a way through which activists address museums. If we think of the very famous Art Workers Coalition demands of 1969, of course they were very critical of MoMA and of museums, but they asked for a democratization of that structure. Now these activists say we don't need you anymore, museums. We have to get rid of you and we have to invent something else. So first thing I would like to underline is the fact that abolition as a destituent side, let's abolish something, but also an instituent side. Let's create something different, something else. We are sometimes talking about alter institutions. But from your point of view, from the point of view of someone who, in my opinion, is a radical museum director, what do you make of this grammar of abolition, and what do you still see a space to be practiced within the existing infrastructure of museums and art institutions?
Wow, that's difficult. I don't know where to start. First, I mean, this is what we have, and it's important to occupy absolutely everything. I mean, just get the place. That said, the system has a way to replicate itself, has a way to mutate, has a way to produce violence, has a way to hide certain elements. Like, for example, British, talking about restitution, British Museum, and, you know, James Cuno, the director of, for many years, of the Getty Institute, he actually, not too long ago, he stated something saying that thanks to the Western museums, all treasures of other cultures, they were kept, because otherwise, if they were in Africa, Latin America, would be destroyed. That is said by a colleague of somebody that directed the British Museum, that during 20 years was losing things. I mean, it's like an irony of who is responsible and who cares about things. That's one. Second, we are talking about restitution, and I don't know why we discuss about that. Of course, I mean, you steal things, and basically Western museums, they stole, imperial museums, they stole everything. You have to return it. I mean, that's, I don't know what's the point. The problem is that, can you return it? I mean, can you return poison? Can you return things to be seen when actually there were many things that are not supposed to be seen? So I think this is very, very important. So that means that decolonization is a way in two senses, it's a path of two ways. You have to question, you have to be interpelled, you have to question. So what I'm saying is, I still like the objects that are in MoMA. What I don't like is the frame of MoMA. What I don't like is the fact that museums are based in accumulation. What I don't like is the fact that museums are based in categories that separate things. What I don't like is the fact that museums discipline. What I don't like is that many people lose their job, not me, What I don't like, actually my contract was expired. What I don't like is that there are certain rules that if you break them, and what are the rules? I mean, you will remember that we were doing something about caring, curating. You know that in Spanish, curator is called commissaire, which actually I think is more proper, looks like political commissaire. So we decided to do something about curar, and actually we got a letter from the medical doctor official body saying that that was against the law, that we have no license, we could not do anything like that. So that means that there are things, borders you cannot cross, and those borders are based on violence. So unless we change those things, unless we change the idea of property, unless we change the idea of cataloging, unless we change the basis of museum, that doesn't mean that we have to burn the museum, I think. I mean, I'm not religious, but I still like to go to churches. The only thing is, I don't pray. So, I mean, I think we can go to museums, but probably we have to demand that museums do not accumulate things, that museums can destroy things, they can, I mean, not them, but, you know, the governance, that the governance should be changed. So, since I'm a museum director, even now with this strange title that sometimes I don't even understand myself, I think it is not enough to say no. I think it's important to imagine other things. I think it's important to identify the enemy that keeps mutating, and I think it's important to look for other alternatives. So the enemy, I'm now in this Catalan museum based in Montjuïc. I mean, whoever, if you've been in Barcelona, is this kind of beautiful mountain. That beautiful mountain used to be a place where garbage was dumped. That beautiful mountain was a quarry. That beautiful mountain was a place where they did two international fairs. In these international fairs, you had at the same time, in 1921, the great Mies van der Rohe pavilion, that means Bauhaus, that means all those things that we know, but exactly like 100 meters next to it, you had what it was called Pavilion of Mission and Civilization, or similar. And in that pavilion, you had living Philippines doing things for other people being observed. So when you go to the museum, you have all these beautiful, which I like, I mean, and I think the experience of Timothy Morton is okay. I mean, but it's okay, it would be better if actually you question the frame of those landscapes, and you realize that those landscapes are hidden. The fact that the mountain, it was a place of garbage, the mountain, it was a quarry, the mountain was a place where the certain beautiful Barcelona was being built, but that Barcelona was hidden, the fact that Barcelona was built on slavery, of slaves from Cuba. Even more so, that Barcelona that was built by Romanese communities, by immigrants community that were like 500 meters of the construction, because you know you need labor to construct that. And you know, when that beautiful Barcelona became even more beautiful, if you can believe it, they had to be gone, otherwise it would not be so beautiful. And when leftist architects decided they had to rebuild the area, they decided that the difference between Romanese and Catalans, I'm Catalan, so I can say, is that the Romanese had no history. So actually, because they had no history, they created some kind of abstract shape, because you know that abstract shape it was ready for that. So museums that will be able to redo those things, that are situated, that redistribute the elements, redistribute the history, that change the governance, are actually very important. Actually, at the same time, there is this Spanish artist, Dani Andújar, that probably you know, and he decided to publish in Romani, in this context I'm talking, the 14th article of the Spanish Constitution, which basically says that we, all the Spaniards, we are equal, you know, all those things we know. We are equal in the Constitution and all those things. He paid for the advertising, it was just the text, it was written in Romani. Actually, the director of the newspaper had many criticisms, and he had many criticisms because they say, how come a democratic newspaper is doing pro-terrorist propaganda, and they thought it was terrorist propaganda because they didn't understand Romani, and they thought it was Basque. So they associated Basque to terrorism, so that gives you an idea. And since I want to get into trouble, I mean, all those things you see in the Venice biennial, actually, of now, I felt very, very annoyed by the discourse and by the politics. And by the discourse, I mean, since this is called Maelstrom, it always reminds me, probably, actually, I didn't read the book, so, but probably you take it from Pasolini, no? Or no?
Alan Poe.
Okay.
A Descent into the Maelstrom.
Okay, so...
More poetic.
Okay. So, but in any case, you know, Pasolini was talking about the turmoil. He was talking how history has to come back, and he has to come back in a turmoil. So I still think that exhibitions, of course, they are very valid, but they are valid not when they ratify, when they become just elements of blindness, elements where there is no body, elements when there is no experience, but when they are elements that create a big turmoil. I mean, this big turmoil, or also called big shit, actually is something that powers, they don't allow us to do, because that's really problematic. When you go to the Venice Biennial and you see all those great, on the other hand, artists' works from Guatemala, but next to people from Asia, next to people from Africa, the only common thing they have is that they're abstract. I mean, if this is not neo-colonial, you have something, I mean, we have a problem. When you go to the American Pavilion and you have the indigenous communities dancing, which I think, you know, is all the right, I mean, of course, but I mean, that sounds very much looks to me like this Catalan pavilion with the Filipinos doing something. And then there is a big lie. I mean, why didn't close the the Israel pavilion? I mean, they could close it. In '74, they closed, or they did something against Chile. In '76, actually, they closed the Spanish pavilion. Of course, when Franco was dead, just in case. So why cannot do it? So I think we have to do, in this institution of the future, there are two things that are basic. One is the maelstrom, the turmoil, is this element through history, through this time that comes back, which is a different time of space and time, which is different of this abstraction. I think this is basic. I think that, as Françoise was saying, museums, affection, I think have something to do. That's why ultra-right is, I'm going from one thing to another, but anyway, it makes sense.
Makes sense.
This is why ultra-right is so obsessed with culture, is so obsessed with controlling culture. So I think it's very important to do that. But of course, unless you change the system and unless you change the frame, there is very little to do. The Greeks, and with this I finish, they have two terms. Actually, they don't come from the Greeks, but you know, I have to start from something. To define space. One it was chora, and the other it was topos. Topos is the space where subject and space are disassociated, so you have a fixed space, and within this space you have total freedom to do whatever you like. And chora is the place that gets done every time. This is very important because this chora is done between humans, is done between classes, is done, but also is done with non-humans, knowing that dealing with non-humans implies that you know, we are not here, we don't need to be here. The earth doesn't need us eternally. So I think this is quite important. And this idea of a space which is instituent is something that, as a museum director, I think is something I would like to defend.
Thank you so much, Manolo. I have two more questions that I would like to ask you, and I think we have less than 10 minutes now. So we'll try. So I'll go to the last question that I wanted to ask you, and then maybe if we do have time, go back to the second. So you just co-curated the Biennale of Sao Paulo, and I was honored when you asked me to write a short text about the work of a Palestinian photographer, Ahlam Shibli. in her series Death, which is about martyrdom in Palestinian. It is a photographic series about how Palestinian people do honor their dead and their martyrs. And I was thinking about it when the bombing of Gaza began, and I was thinking about the tragedy of not even being able about mourning the dead and the martyrs. And this is just to jump to what is happening now in the art in relation to Palestine. Again, this is another thing that, going back to what Françoise says how hypocritical and void were such as decolonial that wherever in the art world is uttered every 2 minutes, and then decolonial stops when we are talking about Palestine, and then there happens censorship and cancellation and so on and so forth. So what do you think is happening in the art world when it comes to Palestine?
Well, what is happening is what Françoise and other people said, that museums are a structure of colonial power. So it's okay to deal with everything, but when you deal directly with something which is a colonial conflict, then it's not okay. So then the art system reacts, and reacts in all these perverse ways, which is defending or asking you to be no anti-Semitic, to defend. You know, the thing is, I think it's very clear. Especially, I would recommend you to see the German pavilion, which I think is scary, because I think it reflects on how something that is happening today is the relationship between fascisms of the 30s and fascisms, neo-fascisms. The neo-fascism is that somehow they empty the words from us. So they use the word freedom, they use the word decolonial, they use ecological, green ecological, blue ecological, red ecological, whatever. They will turn it into a brand, because brands you sell. Brands is something that could be exchanged indefinitely. That's why actually when you see the situation in Palestine and you see the content of the biennial is related, because when you see all these Afro-descendants, all these indigenous, queer people, which, their work is turned into a merchandise, into a brand, and then you oppose to a colonial war, actually they are very logical, actually they are very intelligent, I admire them. So I think this is a problem of the art system, which unless we confront it, and I think there is a moment where there is no middle point. I mean, during many years, during social democratic years or whatever, we thought that was possible, this agonic space. I think the agonic became antagonic in spite of us, and I think there is no. I really think there is no middle point. I think it's really very important to start thinking about a future after the end.
Thank you, Manolo. Last question to you. So we talked about the colonial roots of the museum. We talked about the disciplinary roots of the museum. Famously, Richard Bennett says that the modern museum is the other side of the prison when it comes to the birth of the disciplinary society and our liberal state. The prison is the dispositif that confines, why the museum is the dispositif that plays with a visibility regime. So there are these two sides of the affirmation of the disciplinary society. Someone else, like Brian O'Doherty, says that, again thinking about what Françoise was saying, when we walk into a museum, our body feels like an uncanny and unwelcome piece of furniture, that we really get dizzy because it's not really designed for life. And there's a quote that I want to read from your interview in the book, which I found it very, very interesting, that says, referring to the museum, more than all ordering or classifying, the museum to come will take the sites for life. That is, for that which mutates and transforms incessantly, and in which the materiality of bodies predominates over the abstraction of concepts. And it's also interesting that you don't let's say, you don't oppose bodies to objects, but bodies to concepts. Can you elaborate a bit on this idea of this museum that deals with what mutates instead of what it stays the same?
Yeah, it's bodies against concepts, abstract concepts, because this is actually the enemy. I have nothing with objects. I think we should be careful because that happens also in some criticism of the museum, of not doing something that we say in Spanish, I don't know how to translate it in English, to be careful of not throwing the baby with the dirty water, in the sense that objects, artifacts, they are great. I mean, in Reina Sofia we have Guernica, that's in cage, it's actually, you know, it's like surrounded by guards, but still the presence, the object is there. So I think this is important. I think what we have to oppose is concepts, is when Guernica becomes just a concept, it becomes just an idea, and Guernica is a body in the sense that it has many layers, and those layers have history, and the history, it has wounds, it has, you know, it's not just neutral, it's not just black and white, it's not colors, it's not gestures, it's many things. So I think this is important. And also concepts are rules, and those are really very problematic, because actually with what throw us from the museums, of course, are not the paintings, not the objects, not the documents, they are really great. What throws us from the museums are the 30 euros that cost to go into the museum. I mean, a museum that now is including Afro-descendants, you know, and is great, but still, when you go to the public, it's basically white. So I think against those rules, against those concepts, we have to fight, and then we have to actually claim, in the same way that we are claiming back the streets, I think we have to claim nature or whatever, we have to claim back ourselves, and we have to claim back the objects.
Thank you, Manolo.
I wish this panel could never end.
24 hours.
Now,
maybe in a warmer environment.
Maybe in a warmer environment, but you're warming up the air. Yeah, it was cooler without you. Also, thank you to Oliver. That's been a super interesting voice to dialogue with along the path around the Art for Radical Ecologies Manifesto. And as we said before, now we want to, after discussing the perspective of the institution, to see how artists are inhabiting this relationship with radical ecologies and with the struggles. And Oliver is, of course, an observer, participant observer of the struggle. So, floor is yours.
Yeah, so thanks for giving me the chance to talk about my artistic practice. So I've been focusing on the climate justice movement since 2008, and was primarily interested in creating kind of a cartography of these acts of mass civil disobedience, and I followed different of these actions, from the occupation of open pit coal mines to blockades of harbors where coal is being imported to the European Union, usually coming from states like Colombia, where it's extracted under insane conditions. And yeah, so while working on this cartography of different forms of protest and creating kind of artistic works on the base of the materials I created there, adding text to it, maybe other visual material, I also felt a certain necessity to document the assemblies that organize these activities and that are usually hidden from the public, and I think, yeah, that it has some necessity and some positive aspects of also bringing them to the foreground. And who was here yesterday saw one version of how this can look like, because these activities that are being organized in the background, they it's also not, you cannot just bring them to the public without endangering the people who participate in, and in order to avoid a criminalization, I used different techniques like pixelation, for example, of an entire image, or cutting out the outlines of the speaking people and filling in the visual material from the acts of mass civil disobedience that was recorded afterwards, that was originally planned in this assembly. And so these two layers interact with each other and also develop a quite interesting form of interesting image. So while working in this context, I saw, of course, that there are people like myself participating in these actions and also taking over a certain function within the acts of mass civil disobedience just through the presence of a camera, as in most contexts it also reduces violence, so police doesn't want to beat that much or while they are being recorded, at least in many contexts. I also realized that there's a very high percentage of people who actually would describe themselves as being artists, as being art workers, and so I worked and I tried to figure out what are the different roles of artists and art workers in the climate justice movements, and I curated a series of free exhibitions where I focused a bit on the variety of different roles, like it can be in the organizing different groups to participate in these blockades, or to mobilize for the participation, or to create certain structures that are being required in the activities, like, for example, the great silver inflatable objects of tools for actions that many of you probably have seen, as they were used in so many different activities. Yeah, I think I bring this to an end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. And then I pass the word and I thank for the presence to Raluca, Voinea, and Ovidiu Tichindeleanu. Sorry, Ovidiu, for that. But you know it happens. And they have a different perspective on how to relate art and radical ecologies, or how to practice this relationship with their new creature, living creature, that is the experimental station for research on art and life.
Thank you for this great discussion that maybe should last way longer than this time. I'll start and I'll be very short. I'll try to be very short, and then I'll pass the word to Raluca. So my name is Ovidiu Tichindeleanu. I'm a Romanian philosopher.
You got that really right.
And member of the experimental station for research on art, on life. And I will be speaking to you from an East European positionality, and also from migrant consciousness, and from their wealth, which you here do not have. And that allows us to recognize Western Europe as the first site of the first ecological disaster of modernity, and allows us to look at this place from another Europe, to invite you to do it also for yourselves, to invent another Europe for yourselves, together perhaps with us, against the rise of the monocultural Europe that we see today. And in these groups, we are learning to recognize indeed the effects of climate change, this rise of destructive monocultures, while reclaiming our relation to the land in its non-capitalist dimensions, in its nurturing relations, making a history of cooperation written by ourselves, but in coalitions without claims of purity. And it is this positionality that in the reclaiming relation of land that allows us to sense and to perceive today the intensification of the war against life of coloniality, which makes, of course, the necessity of decolonization painfully clear beyond labels. And this positionality allows us also to see, to perceive the intensification of the erasures of histories in perhaps parts that are ignored. And it is this positionality that allows us also to reject the repackaging of neoliberalism in the new rush for green commodities, and to delve into the history of failures that we live today, which includes the failure of the green transition program of the European Union, which has failed and has created disaster before the war, but is now erased from our very recent memory as having been postponed. And it is this positionality that allows us to reorient our sensibilities together, to go beyond the imperial gaze that Manuel was talking about, this incessant drive for accumulation, and to change the meaning of art indeed in our lives and in the lives of the people we care about, and through this action to actually change what art is. As small as our gestures are and as small as our powers are, as long as this change is meaningful for us, then it's a step in the right direction, we believe. And in this direction of necessary decolonization and ecologization, one thing that I also think it's important to add is that we at least, it's not only for the future, right? That I believe this positionality and the consciousness of the erasures of histories, which includes for us the erasure of the socialist past and of socialism and of other alternatives, is present in our social bodies, that we need to do to ecologize the past itself, to break ecology from its futurism, to break ecology from its push, from this philosophy of looking it only in the future, and think of it more as, well, the seeds that we are planting and the garden that we are making, and to ecologize the past that we can access to. And with this, I'll give the word to Raluca for more about our practices.
Yes, I'm mostly talking about the future, actually. So, as a former art historian and as a former curator and as a former fan of European museums, I'm very tempted to rather respond to the points that you have made so far, which were so, you know, heartwarming in the paths that you are opening. But instead, I'm here to talk as a gardener, but as a gardener who sees that node over there, that sort of environmentalism without a class fight is just gardening, but I'm not dismissing gardening. I think there is a lot of political power in the gardening, at least in the way we are doing it, and I'm also talking here as a survivor of future climate conditions, that where we come from, where the station is located, is actually in the future, and you can see it. You can see that the art objects will not survive there because it's simply too hot. There will be no possibility for an art institution to exist in the way it has existed so far. And yeah, I'm also talking as someone who is trying to see, who is still looking at exhibitions and sees how these exhibitions about ecology are filled with objects that have been shipped from far away, that are filled with cheap labor, and that are filled with so-called ecological artworks presented in rubber black rooms. From this perspective, I'm gradually losing interest in art, but at the same time trying also to look at which perspective can we talk from. And in the text that we contributed with to the publication, we try to shift this perspective and not to talk as ourselves, but to talk as, try to imagine how would the station speak, how would the land speak, what would the land say if it was given a voice with words, and to see what the land needs from us while still extracting from the land. We are at the moment extracting, this value. We are here because of this land. We are here to talk about it. But how would it be if we step back from ourselves and try to listen? And it's quite humbling actually when you start listening to the land, because you realize it is never an empty land. It is never just a piece of land where agriculture has happened. It has all these layers of history, of blood, of family relations, of simply showing how life takes place, how life is existing. So that's where we are actually, and that's the kind of ecology we try to talk about, and connecting it to all these pasts that Ovidiu mentioned, that understanding that we are there because of this past, and we need to understand them before moving on. But not to forget that we are not that fast, that kind of what's happening around us in terms of climate and ecology is disrupting our lives much faster than we can react.
Thank you. And now I pass the word to Rosa Gijon and Francesco Martone, who are contributing with their project Art for the Commons and are bringing us a perspective from Latin America. Are you there?
Yes,
Yes.
we're here. Can you see us?
Yes, not yet. That's why. Oh, so good to see you, Francesco and Rosa. We met the very first call for the Art for Radical Ecologies Assembly here during the Venice Climate Camp 2021. Long time has gone by. So thank you for being present and participating today. Floor is yours.
I would like to share my screen.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, there. Okay.
Okay. This is not grazie. I'm already saying bye. No.
Yeah, we have short time, so cut it short.
Imagine you wanted to be fast, but not that fast. Okay, thank you.
So, hello everybody. Thank you very much for having us here. Actually, we are speaking from the global south. We are at the moment we are in Lima, in Peru, from one of the most dangerous districts in Lima, which is called El Callao. We're having an exhibition in Monumental El Callao. And so we wanted first of all, to thank Marco and Gabriella and Alessandro for having our contribution into the publication, and also for having us in this panel today. So Francesco is going to be running through the images, explaining what kind of contribution we decided to give into the publication.
Yeah, basically, rather than writing ourselves an article on Latin American perspectives on arts and like struggles against extractivism, we decided to work together in a collective dialogue with some artists and curators we're working with quite closely, and with whom we have also been producing some pieces of work. And we decided to identify them as basically this article is a follow-up to a first essay that we wrote on Latin American arts and rights of nature and anti-extractivist struggles for Radical History Review, and for any single issue on the Anthropocene, and also an interview that I made with Bolivian activist and Bruno Latour scholar, Jose Carlos Solon, on the issue of arts and, let's say, struggle against extractive capitalism. And Jose Carlos is now working on the preparation of the social forum, of a Pan-Amazonian social forum. The first work is by two artists, Sofia Costa and Bolo Miranda. Frecuencia Sinangoe is a work done together with the indigenous guard of Sinangoe, Guardia Indígena, and basically it is an effort to contribute to the capacity of the indigenous guard to protect territories against the advance of extractive capitalism. So Bolo and Sofia have been working together with the community to generate, technical skills like, radio transmission and use of drones to monitor the territory and to strengthen the capacity of the indigenous guard to protect their lands. But at the same time, produce also visual materials and artistic work that was then displayed in various locations and opportunities. So you can see that there is a strong intersection between artistic practice, the use of technology, the colonial use of technology. Drones can also be used for many other different purposes, and the anchoring of the artistic practice with territories and with local resistance. Bolo, who also was working with us for the production of a video of a piece of work, Vilcabamba, that we then showed in the Sydney Biennale, that was mostly focused on rivers and rights of nature, then worked on a project, José Tendenza, José Territorio and Memoria.
In Vienna.
In Vienna, that was developed through an artistic residence offered by Oliver Ressler in Vienna. And I think this is an art piece of work that I would really like to underline. José Tendenza Santun was a Shuar activist, anti-mining activist, that was killed 10 years ago, shortly before coming here to Lima to testify in front of the International Tribunal on the Rights of Nature that I currently chair. And Bolo decided to gather various documental materials, from the forensic documents to videos made by the Chinese workers in the mine. And the whole work was basically meant, on the one hand, to highlight the need for justice and for truth about the killing of José Tendenza, but also to offer material that could then be used for the legal case. So you see that arts can also have a kind of different roles and uses that go beyond the actual visual production. Archivo Visual Amazónico was an effort to decolonize the practice of archive in a way to gather materials about the different visions of the Amazon and how the Amazon was being considered as the ultimate frontier of extractivism. And it was an online archive, was gathering materials from scientific documents to artistic production to essays and contributions from anti-extractivist movements, anti-oil movements. So you see here, the challenge is that of really decontextualizing the concept of archive, that's something that is being produced top-down and rather as a collaborative effort. our practice is very collaborative in a way. This is why we decided to offer a collective contribution. And also when we talk about the intersection between art and activism, also in a dialogue with our colleagues and friends from Ecuador, we basically got to somehow an interpretation of the connection between art and activism that resonates what Edouard Glissant was referring to as a right to opacity when different cultures meet, also when different practices meet. Finally, Estado Fossil is a publication that we contributed with. It's a collective work to celebrate, counter-celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first barrel of oil extracted in Ecuador, that since then became a kind of oil state. We thought of offering a perspective from a different kind of South, not the so-called global South, but the South of Italy. And so offering, on the one hand, testimonies from anti-oil activists from the Italian South, like, for instance, the spokesperson of the No Tap movement in Apulia, and on the other, also an elaboration of the narrative of oil and how oil was being represented by documentaries or newsreels at that time as the solution to poverty and a new frontier of civilization. So on the one hand, we worked together with these activists, Gianluca, and then a woman activist from Basilicata, and a leader of the anti-oil movement in Abruzzi. But at the same time, we tried to re-elaborate a little bit some of the documentary material of the various news, cine news, like Cinegiornale Luce or others, that were documenting the advance of the extractive frontier in Italian South.
So our general idea was also to underline the fact that as a platform, not really a collective, both of us, we intend also the production of our work, our relationships, the articles, anything as a collective voice. We cannot understand fighting for Mother Earth, the Pachamama. We cannot understand ways to make it possible to respect and to reivindicate the rights of nature, which is something that comes from the global South, without a collective voice. And so that's why we wanted to contribute in a plurality of voices, and that's what we wanted also to bring to this panel, to the global North where you are, and that's the spirit of our work. Thank you very much for having us.
Experiences, and the last word to Andreko, who has participated from the beginning with a platform for radical ecologies and has dialogued with the manifesto in a dialogue also with Federica on this perspective of anti-speciesist point of view. So thank you, Andreko.
Thank you for having me. For letting me share my art practice. And it's very difficult to close this panel and the last one talking. But I want to say something that nobody said, that I think the book is beautiful. Just nobody said.
Thanks to Bruno.
Thanks to Bruno. Difficult. But it's also needed. It's really needed now that art and ecology became an hype and a brand, and sometimes, as was said before, like art and ecology became brand, become very superficial. So it's needed to put some point and discuss what is art and ecology and how to keep art and ecology radical in a way, in a moment of where greenwashing is everywhere. In these 2 years we share a lot of practice and after theories. practically we did some performance together, like Super Symbiont was a performance, a choreography for the climate march here in Venice 2 years ago, and other collaboration in Milan. And so we start from practice to go through theories. And I think this is important, and I really agree that as an artist talking about environment and climate is needed to stay near to the moment and alive and inside the moment. So this is what we are trying to do. 10 years ago I started this project, it's called Climate Art Project, and it's a project between art, science, and climate justice, I'll say. There is a lot of science because I'm passionate of it, and I try to use the data to make the artworks. My contribution for the work was more theoretical and was more like between question and exercise to convey ecocentrism and the question is how to convey ecocentrism in a planet that is full of anthropocentric and capitalistic narratives. And this is, I think, it's a very difficult question, and the text starts from an image from Charles Bonnet from the 17th century that shows very well, this is called Scala Naturae, the idea of hierarchy of the anthropocentrism, which put at the really bottom, at the very top of the stairs, the human being, after the non-human animals and the plants, and really and the inorganic matters, so the material, the raw material, the rocks. And in my aesthetic of my artwork, as a provocation, in the last years I only represent this part, the last considered things on the planet that are rocks, rivers, and non-human beings. And of course, sometimes I say that the humans are already extinct in my work. I know it's sad, it's a very nihilistic point of view, but of course it's a provocation and it's a way to move the center of the representation and to endorse ecocentrism. So this is part of the reflection that the questions that are in my contribution. And yes, the aim is like how to make an artwork that it's alive, and for mention what was said before, and not that status, that piece in a museum, but it's alive and revolutionary. Thanks.
So we are at the end of this very mind-provoking panel. Thank you everyone for contributing. Thank you all of you for bearing with us.